Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this very interesting webinar. I think the topic is going to be very important to those presenting here. I would like, in the name of the British Chamber, thank the audience and also thank the speakers here today. Let me please start like a brief introduction, so we'll have more time to listen to the speakers. So the agenda today is going to be an institutional opening that's done by myself. Then we'll have a presentation by FGV professors Mr. Jorge Carneiro and Mr. Umesh Mukhi. Then we'll have like a 15-minute Q&A session with participation of the audience. If you want, you can send us your questions by via chat. And then we'll close at the end of the 2 minutes of this webinar. Let me just talk a few words about the British Chamber of Commerce. So our mission is to support bilateral businesses between Brazil and the United Kingdom by creating a diverse, inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable business and social environments to serve our members and help drive growth in trade, industry, services, and investments. We have offices in São Paulo, Rio, Paraná, and Minas Gerais. And our membership is mainly made of networking with high decision-making executives in Brazil and in the UK. We have currently committees and discussion groups in several fronts and opportunities, including sectors such as technology, agribusiness, human capital, international trade, economy, energy, mining, healthcare, and infrastructure, among others, like defense, which was recently created. And if you want to know more about those committees and chambers, please visit our website, which is www.britcham.com.br. I would like to especially thank to the Britcham supporting members whose brands are widely publicized on the opening slide of this webinar. I also would like to thank the President and Vice President of the Human Capital Committee, Daniela Bauab and Gustavo Jorge, for organizing this event. And finally, I would like to thank again the speakers, Mr. Jorge Carneiro, Associate Professor of Strategy and International Business, and Mr. Umesh Mukhi, Associate Professor of Management, both from FGV EAESP, for accepting our invitation to bring this very relevant content to our audience. To all here and to all here that are with us today. Well, the webinar is being streamed through Zoom and YouTube, so it's going to be on YouTube afterwards. The Q&A, the presentation will be performed by the presenters, followed by a Q&A session. Q&A only be sent by Q&A tool on the Zoom platform. When sending your questions, please mention your name and company for identification purposes. There will be a curation for the questions asked, and since I'm time constraint, we apologize for questions that might not be addressed or answered by the speakers. So let me briefly present the speakers. Mr. Jorge Carneiro is an Associate Professor of Strategy and International Business at FGV São Paulo, and Academic Director of the One MBA Global Executive MBA and President of AIB LAC, which means Academic for International Business Latin America and Caribbean chapter. Before embracing the academic career, Mr. Carneiro accumulated 16 years of experience in the oil and gas industry and in the digital companies in the strategic planning, investment, assessment, and international expansion. Mr. Umesh Mukhi, Professor Mukhi, is an associate professor of management at FGV São Paulo. His teaching and research interests encompass topics such as role of business schools, organizational behavior, sustainability, spirituality, and cross-cultural leadership development. I will now pass on the words for Mr. Jorge Carneiro. Mr. Jorge Carneiro, please, the floor is yours.
Dear Marcio, thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's an honor for FGV to be talking to the Britcham. FGV joined as a member of the Britcham this year, and we plan to continue and enhance our relationship. So for me and my colleague Umesh, it's a great privilege to be able to talk to such a select audience. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible. All of you are, experienced executives and leaders in your businesses. And what we're going to talk here is about the challenges of becoming global leaders. Some of you already are or are trailing that path, but it's not easy to go from a domestic leader to a global leader. And Umesh, who is an expert on leadership, is going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about how the One MBA and a global executive MBA program offered by FGV in partnerships with the business schools in other countries, how One MBA can help shape these skills so that people can improve their capacities to actually embrace global leadership. Umesh is Indian by birth, did his master's and PhD studies in France, and has lived in Brazil for maybe 6 or 7 years now, right, Umesh? I'm Brazilian by birth. My parents were Portuguese. I lived in Portugal for 6 years during my teenage period. But except for that, I've been living in Brazil. So we'll start. And as I said, as much as interaction that we can have, the best. So please just raise your hands, or else just start talking and we can engage in a conversation. Okay, thank you very much once again, Marcio, Clara, and everyone at the Britcham. Umesh, please, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, the British Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Marcio and the supporting team, and Professor Jorge Carneiro for having me here. And again, I would like to reiterate, the privilege to be here on behalf of FGV to talk about global leadership. Bom dia a todos. É grande prazer de estar aqui. I would like to emphasize that even post, seminar, if you have doubts, obviously, if you want to ask some doubts in Portuguese, you can type, and probably we can see if we can also, respond to you. So without losing much time, let us jump to our first slide. These are some 2 quotes, very interesting for us to reflect on, that leadership is hard to define, and you know when you see it. And if you're not confused, it's because you don't know what's going on, right? These are quotes from Warren Bennis. Now, very interesting for us that leadership by far has been one of the most researched topics in the management arena, or in the field of management. And yet, when we look at certain concepts of leadership, for example, if we take the concept of trait theories, we may stipulate that leaders are born with specific traits. That's one way of looking at it, that you're already born with some specific skill set, and you're waiting for certain experiences for you to improve that skill set, which will put you on the platform of leadership. The other way around, and the other argument, is that leaders can be made. And this is where the role of business schools, academic institution, even organizations in which you're working, which means that the set of experiences which you encounter eventually chisel out you to become a better leader. So these are the two kind of different viewpoints which we are looking. And within specific viewpoints, we may look at different concepts of leadership. Some leaders are more entrepreneurial in nature. Some leaders are much more conservative in nature. Some may have some level of extroversion. Some may have a level of introversion. So you may look at different theories. So when you look at the panorama of leadership, the question we should ask is, where does global leadership comes into picture? And whether it is a generic term, or are we looking at some very specific set of competencies, which is also discussed in academic research. So let's take the first instance. Very easy for me to coin two terms, global leaders, and develop any concept and say that leaders who have global experiences are obviously global leaders, which is to a certain extent right. But when we specifically look into management literature and some definitions, which as you can see on the slide, you can see that this definition in which the global leader can influence a range of internal and external stakeholders in different jurisdictions is very interesting. So we are looking at some very specific profiles, some kind of personality traits, and some competencies in which you have been put into a context. So what are these competencies? If I start from this slide, and you can see from managing self to managing people and relationships to business and organizational acumen. So when it comes to managing self, let me take the first example I could relate to myself, right? So why should I start a career in Brazil? That's a very important question I may ask. If we may see like some of the best academics and some good amount of academic research which comes in our area are from US, right? So most of the management scholars would tend to go to US and Europe, which is actually a good point of discussion about where, top management theories are leading. So when you look at personal self, the question is, how do I challenge my limits? What is the level of flexibility I have? How do I understand my own biases? And then how do I confront them to explore new avenues? And this is where you can see on the point number 2, global mindset is extremely important. So from the business perspective, why does it matter? And this is the practical case. Think about a Brazilian company who is providing certain services to the banks. They want to go international and they're looking at different markets across the world. Turns out that Indian market is very attractive and they've had no experience in dealing with India. But the executive which they chose was very much curious to go and test the market. And this company is now in India with this executive who has never been outside Brazil. He's an expat there since 5 to 6 years, and they are offering this banking services to specific set of Indian population. So we are really looking at a people who have a level of inquisitiveness and this global mindset to really test the boundaries. Often it happens is that we tend to have a limited worldview because of the news which we are reading. So let's say if I'm in Brazil, most of the content I would be reading would be in Portuguese. Most of the content would be written by the people who are analyzing something from their perspective, which creates a bias, and I end up creating the same bias. So if I'm a global leader, or if I'm having a global mindset, the first thing which I'll be doing is start reading the information from different sources. So which means not only reading things from Brazil, but looking at the news, which is, let's say, from India, from Africa, from US, from Australia. So this is where you can actually see the global mindset comes into picture, which brings to the second point, which is about cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural competencies, and interpersonal skills. So now we are looking at some technical skills. We are looking at specific profiles in which individuals are able to develop linguistical skills. So when we are talking about cross-cultural management, we are talking about individuals who are either curious or they are in the process of learning, or they have already mastered certain culture or language. So here we can think about individuals who speak at least 2 to 3 different languages. We just go back to the slide before, George, so that I can just finish the last part. So cross-cultural communication is extremely important, which actually puts these people, which means global leaders, in a position where they are able to bridge 2 countries. So what kind of profile are we looking? And that will take us to the 3rd dimension, which is business and organizational acumen. So think about people who are country managers who are representing certain brands, and they are not of the same country. So let's give a very practical example, concrete example in Brazil. I won't name the company for the confidential reasons. Think about a sporting goods company, okay, multinational sporting good companies. The executive is not a Brazilian national, okay, the executive is an European national, and it's not even the same national from where the sporting company is. So you think about this person who has been deputed to Brazil for 3 to 4 years on an expat assignment, who speaks one of the languages from Latin America, and who is accountable to give certain business results back to the sporting multinational headquarters, which may be in US, which may be in Europe or anywhere else. So here we are looking at the 3rd skill, is that these executives are the ones who have a long-term vision. Because of their ability of cross-cultural communication or global mindset, they are able to understand the regional complexities. And because they know that, they are able to crack the recipe to deliver business results. They have a long-term vision. So in this case of executive, which I'm talking about, the vision and strategic thinking would be how this executive is able to understand the Brazilian sporting scenario and eventually partner with the football clubs and stars to increase the visibility of the brand. So to do that, that person has the skill set. If the person would not be knowing the sporting scenario, then it would not be possible. And eventually to launch himself or to show to the company that that person is ready to have an assignment in Brazil, we go back to the same part, which is managing self, which means that the executive has constantly shown that that he or she is able to challenge, to develop more competencies in the uncertain scenario. So this is where we are looking at some concrete definitions and parameters of global leadership, which is managing self, managing people and relationships, and having business and organizational acumen. So let's look at the macro level competencies on the next slide of what we see in management literature. So you're looking at macro level, the profile of the executive, who is a systemic thinker. So we have to consider the fact that even if we train these executives, there is a high possibility that the part of system thinking will come through the experience. So if you are working in an Asian context, if you are working in a European context or Latin American context, system thinking would imply that how you are looking at some mega trends which are influencing those regions. So for example, if I think about Brazil, I know that climate change is an important topic, and that would have some perceptions with a variation in terms of how government is offering incentives every 5 years. Then how do I put that in my corporate strategy? And then the rest of the part, which we are seeing here, being open-minded, inclusive, having possibility to navigate complexity, globally conscious and interdisciplinary. So here, I think inclusiveness is something very interesting. This is something which we are seeing as one of the major topics, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So a bigger challenge for already established executives who have been trained in a particular school of thought would be that diversity and inclusion is probably not the strategic agenda of the moment. in the mind of the person, especially when you are looking at the business acumen side and you're looking at the financial part of the results. But obviously, in long term, if I'm trying to relink the dimensions, which is being inclusive and long term, I know that if I have to make my organization attractive for young people to work for, there is a huge challenge for Generation Z or Z on how they connect purpose with the workplace. And also in terms of the rotativity, in terms of how far they're going to stick to one job rather than jumping multiple jobs. So this is actually a huge problem for me. So if I look at people coming from diverse backgrounds, and if I know that they are going to have a huge rotativity in my workplace, it's actually a financial loss for me if I'm not able to retain them. And that may change from region to region. So here I'm able to connect the concepts of inclusiveness with respect to long terms. Then obviously, when we are talking about globally conscious, we are looking at how does an organization positions itself in terms of understanding the ecological, social, and economical impact. Now, very interestingly, we have seen some companies who are well positioned to do that. Some companies are still developing capabilities. And we had a very excellent kind of discussion within FGV regarding ESG concepts. And interestingly, you could see that how certain companies had already developed capabilities to be much more agile when it comes to ecological transformation. Certain companies had not committed to that, and we can see sectorial variation in that. So when we start looking at, for example, a sector, let's say, which is apparel, a clothing sector, my long-term vision would be, how does my supply chain how is my supply chain influenced by climate change, by deforestation, and disruption in supply chain, which may be caused by geopolitical fluctuations. And these things are not new. In fact, 3 years back, if I would be saying that, people would be saying that I'm still talking in theory. But we have seen supply chain disruption due to geopolitical instability. We have seen supply chain disruption due to climate instability, as we see in Panama Canal. So when you put that thing in on the risk management perspective, you probably would see that this kind of executive would be able to stimulate the contingency part in the organization, where you can effectively map out that how do we become much more resilient as an organization. Let's go to the next slide. So concretely speaking now, what kind of profiles are we looking for? Now, global leaders may come in different permutation and combinations, okay? I would say, for example, even Marcio, who is moderating the conversation here, is a global leader in a certain way, right? So you are mediating the interests of the British Chamber. So you're already making connections with the British side, and you're trying to influence the Brazilian counterparts. So here, what we are seeing is that Marcio would be positioned in probably 2 quadrants, which is in purple, right? So you would have limited mobility, but your challenges are dependent with foreign counterparts and global issues, or you are dealing in multiple locations where your challenges are bounded by global operations. So here we are looking at a profile. Let's think about a person who is based in São Paulo, but dealing with headquarters back in UK, Germany, China, or in India, and certain issues which may be popping up in those countries would be influencing my role here. Then we look at the quadrant which is in green. We are looking at an executive who is purely functioning in a local context. So think about a global company, but you have certain executives who are working purely on the local assets. So a multinational car company like Nissan, great. The car seller who is selling those cars would be, working salesman would be probably in this context, but not necessarily the person who would be sourcing the cars of Nissan from Mexico. Here we are looking at the change in the location, which brings in the added level of complexity. Then we probably look in the blue quadrant where you see time-bound mobility, right? So we are looking at virtual interactions or expats who are bounded by headquarters expectations. So here they have to adapt with the local context very fast. So you may think about the Consul General. So in case of British Chamber of Commerce, they would actually have to interact with their Consul General if there are changes every 3 to 4 years, or if the ambassador comes in every 3 to 4 years. Diplomats are used to this profile, expat assignments, nomination assignments, project-based assignments, which are limited by time-bound deadlines. Here, they have a very short time to deliver high results. And then up on the orange part, you are looking at business development managers or regional managers. So an example would be, and these are concrete examples which I'm citing, would be an IT executive who is managing 4 to 5 Latin American countries. So looking at a profile, an executive who is constantly traveling between Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and talking with different business stakeholders to deliver business results. So here, when you look at this quadrant, you can immediately position where you are positioned as a global leader and what are the level of complexities which you will be encountering. If you are bounded by one location, for example, if you're bounded by Brazil, your complexity level would be 1, where you would have to understand the Brazilian scenario, you have to master the language, you have to understand the socio-political context. But now if you're managing the region, that is South America, your complexity goes to level 2 or level 3, where you would have to speak Spanish, you have to understand the regional trends in Latin America as whole or South America. And also, which is challenging, is that how you would be mediating that with your headquarters as well. So you're actually looking at, mastering 2 to 3 traits. So with the level of complexity, your challenges increase, and there will be a variation in that as per the quadrant which I've just shown here. So here, I think the key competency for a global leader is how are they able to understand the context. Often, many times, we see that executives who go on international assignments for the first time, they're not able to understand the context. And if they're not able to understand the context, then they're not able to deal with the business situations in an effective manner. So having the contextual intelligence, knowing the context, is extremely important here. So let's look at the next slide, where I'll be just finalizing with some more details about the levels which I mentioned, right? So level 1 or level 2, which I was briefly mentioning about global leaders. But even here, we see that we can see global leaders in different categories. So the first quadrant, we are looking at a global leader profile who is a preserver, right? So we know that that person has been put in a very specific context to lead a global team or a global project, but that profile is not very much interested in adapting. We very much see that in the in the field of international relations or diplomacy. So, for example, often I've seen that certain diplomats who are deputed, they know that their office staff is there for translation, so they do not make an effort to learn the new language. So sometimes we see that they know that their timeline mobility is different. They're here for 3 years, so there is not much an engagement in terms of how they want to change their ways. Then the same profile may eventually turn to a responder profile when they realize that the cultural context, which they have not been able to master, that has to be dealt in a different way, right? So often, let's say, many executives who come to Brazil, they complain a lot about bureaucracy. They complain a lot about certain laws or certain mechanisms. Well, you may complain, but there is no choice. Eventually, they have to deal with the situation hands-on, because the headquarters out there is not there to listen at any kind of excuses. So which means that the responders, despite of their low level of proactiveness and good amount of exposure, they end up taking decisions in which they have to adapt themselves. Okay. Then we are looking at the third profile, local shaper. Now, this is very interesting, and I've seen that in Brazil quite often. You feel that there are certain individuals who are extremely competent. You want to give them more opportunities. They know and master the local and the national scenario very well, but they lack international exposure. Now, this is something very interesting for all the executives and companies who want to really streamline their talent management and invest in middle management and eventually groom them. So local shapers have high possibility to become eventual global leaders when you train them very well. So you can see that they have a good level of proactiveness, but they lack international exposure. So if you give them more hands-on training, give them opportunities, you can actually convert them into responsible managers who can take up some international assignments. And then lastly, we are looking at integrators. We know that this is the kind of profile which is a kind of an ideal profile, that they are able to challenge certain status quo. They are able to challenge the business concepts, and they are able to manage the relationship between different stakeholders and different cultures. So basically, we're looking at a profile of an integrator who has a high degree of cultural intelligence, and that who is able to bring best practice of one country to other country, and vice versa, where the organization can see the added value. So when you look at the graph on your left-hand side, what we are trying to project in theory is that we're looking at executives who are constantly challenging their knowledge and their skill set and exposure, and they are constantly pushing that, they're applying that to create their future. So if I'm, for example, in Brazil right now, if I put myself in the present moment, and if I have to let's say, if I'm supposed to give the seminar in Portuguese, I would do that in order to actually see whether I can actually speak well Portuguese and interact with stakeholders. So we're looking at executives who are able to constantly not only learn their skills, but test that in the environments. So we are looking at the learning experiences. We are looking at the confidence which they acquire from the learning experiences. And then they're able to project that confidence in the organizations, where they can actually take a pathway towards a career which is more global in nature. And finally, I would just summarize the learnings with what I've seen in the next slide. It's a wonderful article on contextual intelligence and why context matters. I would very much recommend you to go and read this article on Harvard Business Review, which essentially talks about a very interesting profile of a global leader. So again, think about consultants. Consultants, end up interacting with different companies, with different stakeholders. So think about a consultant who has, let's say, been trained in specific economic concepts in US or in Europe, and comes down to South Africa and is offering consultancy services for telecommunication line, which will open up internet services to the African continent. And the article essentially mentions that no, Mandela would want to establish the first link with Malaysia. Now, this was actually against the economic trend. The economic trend would be actually to focus or invest more within the African continent, or eventually, linking it to Europe back at that time when Africa had just had its first elections. But Mandela had a far vision. He had developed a strong sense of friendship with the Malaysian counterparts, and Malaysia at that time had promised to invest in voter literacy of South Africa. So we are looking at a very interesting concept where this consultant all of a sudden realized that you actually cannot negotiate with Nelson Mandela, because he's a visionary, and his vision actually supersedes to certain economic concepts, which actually goes back to what I showed in the previous slides. So you want to have leaders who have technical capabilities, who have business acumen, but sometimes they need to be visionary enough to challenge certain status quo. So here we see that the interaction between Nelson Mandela and this consultant changed the whole worldview of contextual intelligence in how you understand different markets, how you are able to crack in different markets by challenging your views and challenging the specific economic models, which is, in my humble opinion, not a theory. If you look at what is happening in Brazil and what is happening in US, your, let's say, electric cars market, we are looking Tesla as one of the major brands in US, and BYD. Couple of years back, we wouldn't have imagined that, right? So here, what is the mindset of electric car companies, right? Same thing, if I would be positioning myself in India, then I would be saying, how do I look at the Latin American markets? Same goes in the aerospace sector. So, for example, if you look at Air China, they have launched one of the longest routes towards Chinese subcontinent, which is transiting via Madrid. Other airlines are not doing that, right? So you would probably have to see that in certain ways, global leaders are the ones who would take bold steps. Sometimes they are able to take ideal steps, and sometimes they are conscious enough to stick through regular principles of business and operate in those mechanisms. But certainly they have a broader worldview in terms of how are they able to connect not only the business interests, but also the social interests, also the ecological interest in long-term returns. So a company who is investing a lot in, let's say, climate change or community development would have a strong investment in goodwill, which will eventually help company in its business operations in long term. So that's where we are looking that the economics of trade-off would be very different. This will not be actually seen in the CapEx or OpEx expenditures in a classical way. So these are more or less, the ideas which, I wanted to discuss, in the seminar. And obviously the whole idea out there is to see that whether this is possible or not, whether educational experience can give you these possible skill set. Because in order to do that, you would have to talk with different people. You have to get the gist and the experience to work in different continents, and you have to interact with multiple stakeholders. And I think considering the fact that we are here in South America, the fact that we are one of the privileged institutions who can offer such international experiences, One MBA is one of those programs which actually puts that into perspective, where research actually has shown, that the more international experience, interaction with people from different nationalities and stakeholders would improve your global mindset, which eventually helps you to become a global leader in your specific organization. So with this, I would actually hand over to Professor George, who would then be able to, speak more about One MBA. George, you are mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Umesh. So I'll now go and present how the One MBA can help develop those skills. As you saw, it's a lot to become a global leader. You don't have not only to master functional and technical skills in business, mathematics, and so on, but you have to master also skills that are of a more abstract nature, social, behavioral, right, and psychological, even psychological nature, right? So I'll show you how One MBA can actually help us navigate that and develop those skills, right? So here we go. Okay, so the One MBA, we claim that we have a distinctive positioning, right? By challenging business approaches, developing new business approaches, developing and upgrading business behavior and social skills, making decisions under uncertainty, and being tuned to the new reality. We deal a lot of social and environmental responsibility, even knowing that ESG means different things. ESG to a Japanese executive is different from ESG to a Brazilian, to a North American, to a European executive. Truly very different, right? So we have to understand how to have at the same time some global efficiency, some global interconnectedness, and at the same time some local responsiveness. I'll show a short 1.5-minute video about the One MBA, then we go back here.
George, we are not able to see your slides. If you can project again once more your slides.
You want to project again the slides?
Yeah, we are not able to see the video actually. So just share the slides again, the video. Yeah.
So let me see why I cannot see the video. So let me share again. So thank you. So I'm sharing again. Can you see it now? Can you see my screen? Everyone, can you see my screen, Umesh?
Yes, we can. I think you just have to put on the presentation mode.
Yes.
Yeah,
Perfect.
You have the experience. You have faced challenges that drive growth and accelerate wins. Your career has taken you far. Now it's time to go even farther. It's time to explore big ideas, mega trends, shape how business is done around the world. It's time to rethink who you are as a leader. In an 18-month, truly global MBA curriculum at top business schools in 5 regions: Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, and South America. Lead the change by experiencing it during 3 global residencies. Develop global business, cross-cultural leadership, and strategic global networking. Develop strategic mindset of the new configuration of the global business. Become part of a prestigious international community. Learn about the business realities in your own region. One MBA, as premium as you.
Okay, so oops, sorry, let me take out this YouTube here, and let's go back to the presentation. If anybody has any question, please just come up and let us know, and then I'll go on about how One MBA actually is organized to help you actually develop those competences. If no question, then I'll go on. So One MBA is a consortium of 3 top business schools. One in Brazil, FGV, São Paulo Business School. One in China, Xiamen University. And one in France, with also campus in Morocco, Africa, which is Toulouse Business School, TBS Education. All among the best 1% business schools in the world. All of them have the triple top accreditation for business schools. So One MBA was launched more than 20 years ago, right? We have both face-to-face classes around every 2 months in São Paulo, full day, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Then we have classes online in the evenings every 2 weeks, around every 2 weeks, on Tuesday and Thursday from 7 to 10 p.m. Some asynchronous activities like the business game simulation, and a very important one, the social impact challenge, by which our students, our executives and entrepreneurs help impact entrepreneurs, businesses that seek profit, but at the same time resolve a social problem. And we are actually travel to meet everyone, all the students from all the 3 schools in 3 global residencies of 1 week each, in which we visit 2 countries per week, right? And we also have 1 week in the Amazon, what we call the sustainability immersion. So 4 travels.
George, if I may just
yes.
mention, you may actually show that in the slides because we are not able to see the slides.
not able to see the slides. This is funny, because I'm sharing. But let me share again.
Yeah.
So let me share again. Thank you, Umesh. Now can you see the slides?
Yes, now you can make it full screen.
Okay. So I'm sorry for not showing before. This is it. So what I said. So launched 20 years ago, face-to-face classes every 2 months, synchronous classes every 2 weeks, some asynchronous activities, and 4 weeks of travel, 3 weeks internationally and 1 in the Amazon. The profile, experienced executives and entrepreneurs. The average age has been between 37 and 39 years. But of course, we can take younger executives as long as they have global challenges, a drive for growth, and we can of course take more experienced executives, 45, 50 years of age. So what's important is the challenges that they face, the experience that they have accumulated, and why they want to actually build or consolidate a global career, right? So this is it. So varied industries from, business, medicine, journalism, psychology, law, and different industries also, banking, retail, manufacturing, education. So the most varied, the best. So we have a varied pool of students. The next class, the next cohort is going to start in September. We are recruiting now, right? The full tuition is 180,000 reais, which is cheap if you compare to an MBA in the United States, right, or in Europe, and you get the same or even a better solution here, right? And you don't have to stop working. All of our students go on with their professional activities, and they meet every 2 months in São Paulo, and they meet online, right? You can finance your tuition, in up to 24 months, right? And since Britcham is a partner with FGV, there is a 10% reduction, right, of the tuition fee for British Chamber members. So 10% reduction. One MBA gives a certificate by FGV, and also a certificate signed by the 2 other business schools. I mean, this certificate jointly signed does not have a legal value, because you are students of FGV, but it's very important for you to show, right, that you have taken a global MBA program. If you want to get a master's diploma, you have to take, additionally, it's not mandatory, 2 courses on research methods, they are online, and defend a dissertation. Then you get a master's diploma from FGV. Okay, to finish, we have a very strong alumni network composed of more than 1,600 alumni that live in more than 50 countries, and they are active, they help one another, right? So as I say, one MBA is a family. We'll share this, Clara, we'll share this with you. You can click for the brochure to have more information. And if you'd like to apply, right, and participate in the selection process, just click here for information. And of course, I and Juliana would be very glad to talk with you. So you'll have our LinkedIn here and our email, okay? So this is it. Let me also thank Hélio da Silva, who is here with us. Hélio works at FGV admissions office, right? And he is our main contact with Britcham. So thank you very much, and we are open to questions and a debate.
Well, thank you very much for both of you, Professors Umesh and Jorge. Very interesting presentation. Actually, very interesting topic. Sorry. I personally could relate myself to the topic because, as Professor Umesh said, management consulting gives you this global perspective very early in the career. And I passed my good part of my 30+ years of experience in management consulting. So had the opportunity to work in throughout Latin America, many countries in Europe, United States, Ukraine, Mozambique, and lately I was general manager for the Economist Group in Brazil, and I was leader for the healthcare practice in Latin America. So when I saw the skills, I said, this is exactly what you need. The thing is that I was lucky because I started my career in a global management consulting firm where you learn this with your leaders, with your colleagues, or you learn by flying. Yeah, you learn on fly. What do you say? What would you say to a person who's willing to go global or to take that career path, but has not the opportunity to join specific industries such as management consulting, which gives you pushes you to global positions right away? What would you say? Besides, of course, taking your MBA, what would be the suggestions that you give?
Umesh, would you like to start? I'll be glad to continue.
Okay, so very interestingly, Marcio, you actually comment on two things which can be, I would say, detailed. So one thing we are talking about looking for career paths. Right now, there is a good amount of research and career paths on how to make global careers. The other is where you are not conscious about career paths, but you're already working in a company, and you are just thinking, that how you don't want to compromise your financial security in order to continue working with the same company. So let's look at the first option where you're consciously thinking about career paths. Now here, we are essentially talking about creating the circle of opportunities, which will give you the leap. So how those circle of opportunities can develop is trying to see who are your mentors, trying to see who can give you global projects, assignments, trying to make yourself, visible, going through certification courses or in-company training, and also trying to bring in new ideas to the company as well. So that's one way where you can actually make yourself more visible in the company when you actually know that what is happening on the strategic radar of the company. And what I'm bringing on the table brings certain value, which will put me in a very interesting position. That's one way. The second way where that your company is not investing in you, then you actually have to look out for higher leap possibilities. So this is where programs, short executive programs, long-term programs would actually help you, because these steps are basically the steps which are helping you in fermenting, in good opportunity. So let's say you do a short training program, which is of extremely well value, that will give you actually a jump, because you are able to use networking skills and jump to the career. The third thing, which I feel like, most of us, at least in Brazil, we do not see it in this way, and which many people, which if you go to my slides, we talk about local shapers. They are extremely talented people, but companies do not invest in them. And I think that is one of our major challenge in South America. I've trained many young people who have good English speaking skills. Companies are looking for English speaking talent, but somehow there is no matchmaking. Companies are not investing in terms of how do we invest in global profiles who can actually give us, let's say 5x person in return on investment in training. And I think this is a collective effort, because you are not only looking out for a mentor, but you're also looking out for specific HR policies. And what you just mentioned in your case, that you were lucky enough because you know that the company had actually developed global policies in terms of how you would go through these assignments. I think here we are still in a very initial stage of doing that. When you talk about economists, we know that economist is a reference for us. And if you look at what is the business sense for economists for having you here, I mean, that's the mindset that you're looking, that's the organizational mindset. Many of the organizations who are in the operating in national operations, they do not necessarily think in that sense. So they want to get done things at a very reduced cost. They do not invest in the talent. So this is where I think, probably a lot of investment would come in training and development. I would ask Josh to build on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Umesh. And the question was very good, Marcio, because you can develop those skills by on-the-job training, right? As you take up responsibilities that are more global in nature, but that may take longer and may become too idiosyncratic to your own experience. How to learn from others' experiences. So this is where executive programs can help, because you are come together with other executives and entrepreneurs that have had other experience, and you can share. Not meaning that everyone, the experience that you have is the best one. It's one experience to be contemplated with the others. And second, in a global executive MBA, you are exposed to concepts that they may not be obvious if you are not, let's say, exposed to them in the first place. They are not obvious to learn by yourself, right? So this is how the programs help, by bringing new concepts and methods and ways to look at things. And the One MBA, something that we do is to develop this skill set by experiencing it in global teams. So we match our students in 3 global teams along the program. So you change the team you're allocated to, and you work remotely by Zoom and so on with peers from China, from France, from Morocco, from the United States, and so on, right? All along the program. And this gives you a lot of challenges, because how a Chinese gives feedback or does not give feedback, actually they have difficulties in giving feedback, is very different from how a Brazilian or a Dutch or a British, for that matter, gives feedback, and how you accept or not negative feedback, for example. How you deal with time, punctuality. What is performance in a Chinese perspective, in a Brazilian perspective, in a British perspective? They are quite different. So we learn to understand the differences, and we learn not to impose any of the, let's say, our ways of doing things. Second, in the One MBA, you are also exposed to your own self. So we learn about our strengths, weaknesses. Some of our weaknesses are just unsurmountable. They were part of your upbringing. Some of us feel afraid of flying, but we can help. What can you do if I'm afraid of flying? Because I'll have to fly anyway. So some of us will be more, let's say, proactive, some less. Some will be more innovative, some less. But we have to understand your weaknesses so that you can help deal with them. And second, not only self-awareness about yourself, but about the team. In a team that you work, some of the components, some of the members may be dreamers. They always think about the future, but they never get things done or have difficulties in getting things done. On the other hand, there are members who'll jump to the first solution that looks good. They are pragmatic. You need them to make things happen, to catch the low-hanging fruit. But you cannot live only with pragmatic persons. You have also to get some dreamers. But how do they go together? How do you get, let's say, the conflict that emerges? How you get the positive outcome of the conflict rather than non-moving? So there is a nice article that says, the title is Paralysis by Analysis and Extinction by Instinct. So you cannot analyze all the time and not do things because you get paralyzed. And you cannot only make decisions by instinct, because then you'll probably be extinct. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Marcio, for the great question.
Great answers. Thank you very much for both of you. Now I'm going to quickly go through the Q&A. Because we're getting to the end of the session. First of all is a question about the recording and the slides, if they're going to be available later. Yes, I think the recording will be at the YouTube. And the slides, I'm not quite sure how we're going to make them available, but they will be available, and we will inform you later. There's a very interesting question about from Luis Renato Ribeiro, saying, okay, his question is, can you please explore how empathy plays an important role on engaging global leadership roles? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, very interesting. Umesh, would you like to start with that?
Sure. Very interesting question out there, and relevant as well, especially when we look at how the scenario had developed post-pandemic. A lot of question and discussions around the importance of resilience and empathy came in our attention. And it was important because at that time we realized that beyond achieving the corporate targets, if we don't stick by the people or the team, then what kind of leader we are, or what kind of collaborators we are. So to answer your question concretely, yes, empathy is extremely important and also effective skill set. And when we think about empathy, then let us not mistaken it as something as a soft skill or as something which is always related to understanding the emotions. Basically, if you look at all the influential leaders, so I would say let's take example of Gandhi. If Gandhi was not able to put himself in the place of people who were actually facing the challenges, he would not have been able to understand the whole perception, the ground reality. So when you are an empathetic leader and you try to put yourself in the position of your team members, you actually get an unbiased view of the situation. And that's extremely important. So that's why I mentioned that it's an important competency. The second thing is, if you develop the level of empathy, not just the relational empathy, which is relating with people, but also relating with society, relating with societal problems, then you actually push the boundaries of making your organizational collectively empathetic. And that is extremely important, right? So for example, we would say, let's say a whole team would not be agreeing that we should be taking action on climate change. But if we organize, let's say, a CSR initiative by working in a community which has been facing some challenges related to climate change, you suddenly make them much more aware. So when you become more empathetic with team members, with societal problems, you are able to pull in more different views, more insights, and you can actually develop a good amount of, let's say, social, political, and even pooling the economic capital to resolve certain issues. The key out there is that how do you use that empathy in different ways? Sometimes you are able to manifest it emotionally. Sometimes you act on it without manifesting. So I think that's the whole key. And again, we will see that certain sectors may have different levels of empathy. If I look at finance sector, you don't have to show empathy. The profile of the sector is very different. But if you look at hospital sector, you would probably expect a lot of empathy from doctors and nurses. And if you go to an NGO, then the level of empathy would change to activism. So you also have to understand the sectoral realities and use it in a more competent way.
Yeah, for the sake of time, I'll just say something very quickly. When the world needs people who can deal with very much uncertainty. And this gives people sometimes a sense of even desperation, right? Pessimism. People think, oh, this is impossible to master all these challenges and so on. So what can I do then? So empathy here means understanding people's emotions, helping them come together and say the challenge is big, but together we can face it and overcome it. We don't know the solution yet. The solution will come from the group and from the engagement of all of us. So changing this negative, this anguish, this pessimism into a movement, right? Otherwise, what we see in companies many times is a lot of motion, but no movement, sequence movement. So how do you get people? Everybody's working a lot, but are they working in a unified direction? Are they actually, what George is doing is consistent with what Umesh and Marcio are doing? So empathy is also understanding people's emotions and feelings and help them come together to a bigger objective. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for your answers. We're coming to an end here. I would like to thank the speakers for this interesting content. I think I would like to thank the audience for the presence, for the questions. I hope everyone has enjoyed that as much as I did. I'd like to pass on the words to the speakers, like a 1-minute word for each one. The last words, if you feel like, feel free, please.
Umesh, then I finish.
No, I think it was an absolute pleasure. The questions were pertinent, and obviously we are here available to clarify any doubts, and eventually, look forward to even, interact with company executives. What you just mentioned, Marcio, in your question reflects that, many executives go through the same learning challenge. So we will probably, looking forward to interact in person if possible, to even see, get in more insights from how British companies also, see that, how their global leaders, navigate through such complexities. But having said that, thank you very much for the time and opportunity and for your moderation as well.
Yeah. Also, thank you very much for the rich stamp for Marcio and Clara. Right, it was a privilege to be here with this select audience. So, if you want to write to me about the One MBA or anything about FGV's programs, george.carneiro@fgv.br. Okay, I'll be glad to interact and talk with you. Thank you very much, Marcio, and everyone.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for the presence, for the audience, for the presentations. The upcoming events from the British Chamber are available in our website. I invite everyone to subscribe to those, especially to our YouTube channel. We have already had, I think, around 45 events between in presence and virtual. We expect to finish 2024 with more than 100 events. So it's a wide opportunity, very good opportunity to learn things from experts like today, from different areas. And I hope to see you soon in our next webinar. Thank you.
Pronto, Clara, tudo certo? Bom, vamos fechar aqui então. Obrigado, hein?